Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Alphonso Peluso and I'm a Studio Associate Professor in the College of Architecture at IIT, and I'm coming to you live today from our beautiful campus. It is a sunny summer day in Chicago. The temperature is nice. And today I'm going to talk about what is Grasshopper. So maybe some of you have used Grasshopper, maybe you've never used it. Grasshopper is a plugin for Rhino, and now it's actually part of Rhino. So if you're using Rhino 6, it is now part of the software, and all you need to do is type in the command Grasshopper and the Grasshopper canvas will load up. And the Grasshopper canvas, this is the Grasshopper canvas. This is what I'm moving around. So if you're using previous versions of Rhino, maybe Rhino 5, you will have to download the plugin Grasshopper and install it. So here is a list of topics that I'd like to cover today. What is Rhino Grasshopper 3D, or what I'm just going to call Grasshopper? I mentioned that it was initially a plugin, now it's part of Rhino 6. It is a visual scripting interface, and simply it tells Rhino what to do. Now, the geometry that you create in Rhino is the same as the geometry that you can create in Grasshopper, or vice versa. What you create in Grasshopper is the same as the geometry you could create in Rhino. Grasshopper just allows you to do it, let's just say, differently for now. So that's, in a nutshell, what Grasshopper is. It's a visual scripting interface. It tells Rhino what to do. Who created it? David Rutten. He was trained as an architect. He is also a computer scientist, so he put architecture and computer science together and came up with this plugin. Who uses it? Well, I don't think David Rutten could have predicted who was going to use it, or actually how much it was used, or how many people would use it, and actually more importantly, how it would change the landscape of architecture. The Grasshopper 3D webpage. Let's tab over and take a look at this. So if you go to grasshopper3d.com, this is where you will find a great resource all about Grasshopper. There's tutorials there. You can interact with other Grasshopper users. You could post your work on there. So that's a great place to start. Food for Rhino. Food for Rhino is a website where you can find plugins for Rhino and Grasshopper. Now I've changed the sort by to downloads just to see the most used downloads, and most used plugins, I should say. So we see kangaroo, we see ladybug, we see pufferfish. So you see there's a theme of animals. So there's some great names for these plugins. Parametric Design. So I just went to Google, typed in Parametric Design, and you see a lot of great images, a lot of fantastic geometry, and this is what Parametric Design allows us to do, and as I mentioned, to change the face or change the landscape of architecture. And if we look at one example, we look at the Absolute Towers by Mad Architects in Mississauga, Canada. The forms of these twisting towers is something that you can do quite easily in Grasshopper. In a future video, I'm going to use these as a case study, and we'll look at how to create them in Grasshopper. Types of capsules, and I've basically two categories: container versus capsule. So let's start to get in the Grasshopper interface. So as I mentioned, we're looking at the Grasshopper canvas. It's a separate window from Rhino. I usually keep mine in the upper right, and I overlay it, and then I can see what I'm doing in Rhino or what Grasshopper is creating in Rhino. So what is a container versus a capsule? Well, let's actually start just below the main menu here in Grasshopper, and let's look at the first several tabs. So from what you see abbreviated PRM for params all the way over to display. Those are the default tabs in Grasshopper. Everything to the right of my capsule is from a plugin that I've plugged in to Grasshopper. So we have parameters, we have math, we have sets, we have vector, we have curve, we have surface, we have mesh, we have intersect, we have transform, and we have display. Those are the default tabs, and there are a lot of capsules in there. Let's start with a container. So under the first tab, parameters, we have geometry and we have primitive, and you'll see these have a hexagon icon. So that's one way you can know that it's a container that contains geometry versus a capsule. And we'll explain the difference between those two. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull down a geometry capsule. Okay, this capsule that I've categorized as a container, one thing I can do is I can contain geometry from Rhino. So I can bring geometry over from Rhino into Grasshopper. So I'm going to right click on this container capsule, and I'm going to go down to set one geometry, and I'm going to select this square that I had drawn in Rhino. Now you see that square, it turned green, which means it's now embedded, not embedded, but it's now referenced into Grasshopper. So when I deselect that container, the geometry is no longer green here in Rhino, and this container capsule has turned gray. So that's a container. Now let's look at a capsule. So I'm gonna double click in the Grasshopper canvas, and I'm gonna type in line. You see there is a container for line. It has the hexagon, but there's also a line. Create a line between 2 points. I'm going to select that. And let's talk a little bit about this capsule. So this capsule, on the left, it has inputs. You see A and B. You see the middle of the capsule where it's abbreviated for line. It has LN. And you see the right of the capsule where the output is. So in order to draw a line, we need 2 inputs, and it's going to produce the line, which is the output. Now, when I teach Grasshopper to beginners, what I will do is I will go ahead and go over to display, and I will choose draw full names. That gets rid of the abbreviations. Now it's a little bit easier. We can see that it's looking for 2 things, a start point and end point, and then it's going to create a line. And this, again, I mentioned, is the body of the capsules where it's labeled, so you can see that that is a line capsule. So it needs 2 things, a start and an end. So I'm going to double click. I'm going to type in XYZ. What XYZ does is it brings up some options, and one of them is construct point, because it needs a start and an end point. So there's my first point, my start point. I'm going to plug that in. And you'll see over in Rhino, it's placed that point at 0, 0, 0. 0 in the X, 0 in the Y, and 0 in the Z. It's at the origin in Rhino. So we need a second point. So I'm just going to copy and paste that capsule. I'm going to plug it in. Okay. Now we don't see an actual line because the points are in the same place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce a number slider. I'm going to double click, and I'm just going to type in 50, and I'm going to plug that into the X. Okay, now you see over here in Rhino, you see that second point. Okay, and it's drawing a line between those 2 points. You see that line is showing up there along the x-axis. Okay, so you see the difference between a capsule that will just contain geometry, or what I call a container, and a capsule that will actually need inputs and outputs and then produce geometry. Now I did mention there was two uses for a container. So let's say that I went up to the params menu and I brought out a line container and I plugged in my line capsule. So this is just containing that information. Okay, what's next on our list? Okay, so capsule display types. So let's talk a little bit more about the capsule display types. Make my screen a little bit larger so we can see. Okay, so we went up to display, we turned on draw full names. Another more commonly used way to display capsules is actually by draw icons. So when you're looking around YouTube and you're looking at on the web and looking at Grasshopper tutorials, the majority of the time you're going to see draw icons being used. So you can go back and forth. You see the display just changed a little bit. Go back and forth, learn both methods, start to memorize what these icons look like. Okay. Control Alt, where are the capsules? Okay, so a lot of times beginners will just start double clicking, and this is actually the way I learned Grasshopper. I'll just double click and I'll start to type in a Rhino command. That's certainly one way to learn Grasshopper. Try to type in commands that you know work and do things in Rhino. So for example, I typed in array and I can choose rectangular array. Now, where is this capsule located in all these tabs? Well, the way that I can find that out is I can hold down the Control and the Alt key, and you see my cursor now has a little I for info, and I click and it shows me, it gives me those arrows, it shows me where that is in the Rhino tabs, in the Grasshopper tabs. And that will then lead you to other types of capsules, other types of arrays. So it's helpful to get you to start digging into the Grasshopper tabs. Okay, display preferences. So let's take a look at this. Okay, so what you're seeing on the screen is you're seeing the colors of these capsules, and they're just all gray to begin with. So that's one type of display preference. The other type of display preference is the geometry. Okay, so we've created this line. Okay, let's see that in Rhino a little bit better. So we've created the line. When I select this line container capsule, it highlights in green, and then that geometry also highlights in the Rhino canvas. So that's part of the display preference. When we deselect it, that line is just red in the Rhino window. Can we change these things? Sure, we can change a lot of these things. So display preferences. Okay. If we go to Shift Control P, and you see that a little bit further down the list here. So if I type in Shift Control P, it brings up the Grasshopper settings. And I'm not sure what the default is, but it remembers the last subject I was on. So I was on palette. And here under palette, what you'll see is all the default colors of the capsules. So for instance, a disabled capsule is a faded green. When it's selected, when that disabled capsule is selected, it becomes a faded green, but when it's not selected, it's a faded gray. An error capsule is red. A hidden capsule is not by default magenta. I've made it magenta, and I advise you guys, and we'll get into that a little bit, to change the color of your hidden capsules, just so it's just outstanding. You can tell those capsules are hidden, and you just have to choose a color that's not used by default. So when you look through here, you'll see all the colors that are being used. So basically, if you stay away from orange and green and gray and red, you can pick any other color than the colors you see here and set those to your hidden capsule fill. Okay, so let's look at how that's useful. Let's say that I do not want to see these 2 points in Rhino. I don't want to see them. I can select those 2 points. I can right-click in the Grasshopper canvas and I can choose Preview Off. You no longer see those in Rhino. If I turn those back on, just right-clicking in the canvas, Preview On. Now you see those points in Rhino. I'm going to turn them off once more, Preview Off. Now I'm going to deselect. So now those capsules have turned magenta. I know that the preview is off. I know that those are hidden capsules. And trust me, when you have these very large Grasshopper definitions, you're going to want to be able to turn the display off, turn the preview off. And by changing that hidden capsule fill color to magenta, it's just a lot easier for us to see. Okay, talked a little bit about display preferences or Grasshopper settings, and remember that was Shift Control P. The other thing that we want to look at is wire display. So you've seen me, if you're new to Grasshopper, you've seen that I'm just going to this little loop on the output side of the capsule, and I'm dragging out what's called a wire, and then I'm plugging it in to a capsule. In this case, it was an array, and you see an array of rectangles has been made. To unplug it, couple ways I can do it. I can hold my control key down, and I could drag it back. Now, you don't have to drag it back. It's just really using the control key when you drag unplugs it. Another way that I can unplug it is I can right-click over this geometry input, and I can choose disconnect. And then if you have more than one capsule plugged in, more would show up here. So I could unplug it or disconnect it. That's one way to do it. Now these wires, they tell us something. There's information embedded in the wire display. So if I go up to the main menu and I go to display and I turn on draw fancy wires. That's what you want to use, draw fancy wires. Okay, this is a single wire. That means that it just has one object. So one object is in this container, or one piece of geometry. Okay, if I was to look at a place where there was multiple objects, then this would have 2 lines. Okay, so if I was to right-click on this and choose Set Multiple Geometries, and I selected another piece of geometry, so I have that one, and then I have my square, so the square and the circle. That wire is now showing me a double wire, and it doesn't give me a wire for every piece of geometry. It's either a single or a double, or lastly something that's called a data tree. So let's actually go ahead and look at a data tree. Not really talk about data tree, but look at that wire type. So coming out of this array, if we contain this geometry, so I'm going to go over to parameters and I'm just going to contain it into a geometry capsule, and I go ahead and I plug that in. You see that it is a dashed wire. So that dashed wire represents a data tree. Okay, let's take a look at what other things that we're going to be covering. So that was wire displays, turning on draw fancy wires. We looked at the Grasshopper settings. Okay, some of these other things, I'll make sure that I cover these, but we'll go a little bit out of order. So panels are your friends. Okay, this is a good time to look at panels because we were talking about trees and dashed lines. So a panel can be found under input. So it's this, looks like a post-it note with some scribbling on it. So I'm going to go ahead and bring down that panel, and I'm going to plug in that container capsule. And panels are your friends because they tell you what's happening. So basically, if we look at this first geometry, this was a circle that was brought in from Rhino. I used the array, and then it created a whole bunch of circles. Okay, and the panel can tell me how this data is organized. And right now it's a data tree. It's organized in several lists of lists. And I have a great tutorial, beginner tutorial, that you'll find on my channel that talks about data trees. But since this is an intro to Grasshopper, one thing that you should know is everything in Grasshopper is either organized in a single list or a tree, which is a list of lists. Okay. Now, when you're working in Grasshopper, you can use a tool called Scribble. So the text that you're seeing for this outline that I put together for this video, this text was all done by using a Scribble. So if I double click and I type in Scribble, I can choose, it says the icon is ABC, I can choose a Scribble. I didn't mention it before, I'll mention it now, but David Rutten, he definitely has a sense of humor. So there's a lot of funny things that are happening inside of Grasshopper. So double click me, so I could double click and I can type in anything. Basically, when you're using Grasshopper, you want to leave your future self some notes. Because when you come back to your Grasshopper definition, you're going to open it up and you're going to say, holy cow, what did I do? What is this? I'm lost. So these scribbles are going to help you. They're going to help you tell your future self what you were doing. Okay, so in this case, I was creating an array. Okay, so leaving yourself some notes. What were you doing? What could you be doing? Whatever. You can do that with a scribble. Okay. Now, one thing that I'm not seeing on here that I'd like to cover is the arrangement of your capsules. So you want to stay very organized when you're working in Grasshopper. And architects are they want to keep things aligned. So for example, I'm just going to misalign these. I think I just kind of align things automatically. Let's say that I want to left justify these 2 point coordinates, or these two capsules that you see in purple. Let's say I want to left justify them. I select them, and let me zoom in here. Okay, what you see when I select them is the align window shows up, and I'm just hovering over, and you see the word align, and then you see Mr. Sparkle. Let's get to that in a second. This is getting back to David Rutten's sense of humor. I'm going to left justify. There's a left justify arrow that aligns those. Okay, let's say I wanted to do some vertical adjustment with these two capsules. Okay, then I could use this one to do some alignment. Okay, let's show that again. I can use the up and down arrows to do the alignment. So you have some alignment in two directions that you can use, and that's very helpful. So say now I wanted to align these capsules. So we, as architects, we go crazy just aligning all these things. So you saw that it was it said Mr. Sparkle. So that is a reference to The Simpsons, which I didn't know, but one of my students pointed out that Mr. Sparkle comes from an episode of The Simpsons. So that's where that comes from. So you see some of David Rutten's sense of humor there. Okay, so we looked at some alignments. We looked at Scribble. There's also a draw sketch tool. So this goes, this speaks more toward the organization of your definition. So here at the top you see a pencil where I could create a draw tool. So I could circle something, for instance, and I could do something like that. And I can change the line type. It could be dashed, dotted, and so on. I could change the thickness of that, and I could also change the color of it. Not really finding a color I love right now, but let's just go with something like that. And then it's always good to click on the, oops. I was going to say it's always good to click on the green check mark that left my screen. So I could use the draw tool in combination with a scribble. So I can type in, I can double click and type in scribble. And that's my line container. Okay, so again, another way to leave your future self some notes. Okay, we talked about panels, and panels are your friends. Another thing is the half green and half white cylinder. Okay, so when you look at my Rhino window, there's a lot happening. There's a lot being displayed. You don't always want to see everything at once or everything that's in your definition. Okay, so we'll call this Grasshopper, all these capsules, all of them together, we'll call it a Grasshopper definition. You'll hear that terminology. You could also call it a Grasshopper script. Let's say we didn't want to see everything that's being displayed. We only wanted to see one capsule. Up here in the upper right in Grasshopper, we have some display options. I'm just going to hover my mouse over these. So when in doubt in Grasshopper, just hover your mouse and wait for some instructions to come out. So this says don't draw any preview geometry. Okay, so that I click that shows nothing from Grasshopper in the Rhino window. Everything from Grasshopper went away. Then there is draw wireframe. We don't have anything that's generating a solid right now, so it's wireframe regardless. And then you have draw shaded, which is the default. Then you have this wonderful tool which I refer to as the half green, half white cylinder. And it draws only the geometry of the selected capsule. So nothing is selected right now. Everything from Grasshopper went away. Remember, those blue objects are something that was generated in Rhino. Now, when I click on the capsules, it only displays what's coming out of that particular capsule. So that's a really helpful tool inside of Grasshopper. You just have to remember that you've turned it on. A lot of students will turn it on and forget, and when they deselect, everything goes away. So there's that. And the last thing, I think, the last thing that I want to cover as a, what is Grasshopper 3D is groups. This white bounding box that you see around my text, that I grouped all the text together. So let's go ahead and look at how groups work. Okay. Let's say that I wanted to separate the line that I made from the array. I can select those capsules. I can use the shortcut Control G. Okay, now you see it's made a color bounding box around those capsules. And now I can move those capsules around all together without selecting them all, like making a window or a crossing selection. I can just simply click on this bounding box. And when I double click on the bounding box, it changes the shape of the bounding box. So you have this one that's a bounding box, and then if I double click, I get these organic shapes, and if I double click again, I get some other types of shapes. So it's really up to you. And I can always right click on those and change the color. Okay, so you can start making these very colorful definitions, but always telling your future self how things are organized. So groups is one way to keep geometry organized. Now, if I wanted to remove a capsule from a group, I would simply select the capsule I want to remove. Let's say that I want to remove this number slider. I select the number slider. I right-click over the color, not over the capsule, but over the color for the group, and I choose Remove from Group. Now it's gone from the group. To add to the group, you'd select the capsule you want to add. So in this case, if I want to add the number slider back in, I select it. I right-click over the bounding box for the group, and I choose Add to Group. Okay, so at a very basic level, that's what Grasshopper is. If you have any ideas for future videos or future topics, or you want to see more of something or less of something, please comment below. Let me know. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. You'll see my face will pop up here in the upper left. You can click on that and you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you'd like to know what I've been up to, or what I'm going to, what I'm planning to do, or what videos I'm planning to make, please follow me on my Instagram. Some interesting things there around architecture and some of my hobbies and some of the things I'm doing at IIT with my architecture students. So give me a like down below if you felt this video was helpful. Subscribe to my channel and check me out on Instagram. See you next time.